Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and this time I'm taking a look at the brand new Tier 10 Chinese tank destroyer. It is the WZ-113G. This vehicle packs the standard 152mm main armament that you will be used to from the Object 268. It combines this with some pretty okay mobility, a really nice wide gun arc, okay elevation and depression angles, and 230mm of frontal hull armor, making this one of the most well-armored Tier 10 tank destroyers after probably the Jagdpanzer 100. Stick around, I've got some gameplay coming right up after I give you a full rundown of the statistics of this vehicle, and if you have no interest in picking up the brand new Tier 10 Chinese tank destroyer, then I'll show you some of its weaknesses and tell you how to engage it effectively on the battlefield when it hits the servers in update 920. So here we have the WZ-113G on the left. We're going to see how it stacks up compared to one of two Tier 10 Soviet tank destroyers, the Object 268, the T10 the American non-turreted Tier 10 tank destroyer, and of course the famous Jagdpanzer E100. The WZ-113G has 152mm main armament, very similar to that on the Object 268. The vehicle fires just over 3.5 rounds a minute, identical to the T10 and it's slightly behind the Object 268, therefore with regards to damage per minute. Now of course the 113G has higher DPM than the Jagdpanzer E100, but remember that vehicle is packing 1050 average damage per shot. Penetration wise, the 113G is kind of disappointing compared to the rest of the bunch. 290 is significantly less than the Object 268, the E3 and also the Jagdpanzer. But 290 is still great, and it's really only the most heavily armored vehicles in the game that will be avoiding your shots. And if for some reason 290 is not enough, or you're engaging your opponents at maximum ranges, then you can always load Heat, which has 395mm of penetration. And just like all of the other 150 to 155mm main armament Tier 10 tank destroyers, this vehicle has fantastic high explosive rounds with 90mm of penetration and 1100 alpha damage, which should definitely give the advantage over lightly armored targets. So gun handling, is this where the 113G pulls ahead of the rest of the bunch? Well, kind of. Look at the aim time, 2.5 seconds, better than the 268 and the Jagdpanzer, joint best with the E3 in this comparison. However, the accuracy, on the other hand, is the worst at 0.38, and that is much worse than the Object 268's rather good 0.33 dispersion at 100 meters. However, this changes again when we look at the dispersion that the vehicle suffers when it's moving. 0.19 is better than the 268 and the E3 and only just worse than the Jagdpanzer, but look at the turret reverse when you turn this gun. It's 25% better than the 152mm and the 155mm on the 268 and the E3. When you combine this with 6 degrees of gun depression and fantastic gun traverse, 12 degrees to the left, 12 degrees to the right, that's double that of the Object 268 and 50% better than the E3 and the Jagdpanzer E100. This really helps when you're trying to angle your frontal armor, as I'm going to be showing you later on. And when we look at the gun handling holistically, I'd probably say that the 113G has the best all-round statistics in this comparison, and it truly is one of the best things about the vehicle when I've been playing it through. So now onto the mobility. 38 kilometers an hour forwards, slower than the 268 but way better than the E3 and the Jagdpanzer. 16 backwards, that is very nice for when you want to stop your opponents from flanking you. That's double that of the E3. And while the vehicle's ground resistances are fairly nice, as we can see here, its power to weight ratio kind of lets the tank down. It's just under 12 and only slightly better than the E3, and it's really, as I mentioned, the ground resistance's advantages of the 113G that makes this vastly more mobile than the non-turreted Tier 10 American tank destroyer. And when you combine these excellent ground resistances with 30 degrees a second tank traverse, better than all of the other vehicles, this thing just outperforms them when it comes to re-engaging targets that might have surrounded you. So while it might be all good to have a great big gun, decent gun handling, and pretty okay mobility, that will mean nothing if the vehicle doesn't pack some substantial armor to back it up. And it is good news for the 113G, 230mm at the front, 80 at the side and 70 at the rear. And while it's all round better than the Object 268, it still pales in comparison compared to the E3. So is this 230mm all the way across the front of the tank? Well, that's not the case. This plate here is 100mm and the lower plate is 135mm, And so what this means is that when your opponents have you at this kind of an angle, they only need between 180 millimeters of effective penetration to go through here to 200, 210 to have a 50-50 chance to go through your lower plate. But take a look at this upper plate. All of it around here is 230, and over the mantlet, well, we've got about 300, 400 millimeters of effective armor all over this part. And it's only really when your opponents get the side of the mantlet that they have a good chance to be able to penetrate it when they bypass the bulbous spaced armor that's over it. And so what this means is that if you are using your 6 degrees of gun depression in the 113G, then you've probably got about 300 millimeters of upper plate armor on this tank, and that's not when you're angling it. Remember, this vehicle has a nice wide gun arc. Look at that all the way over to the side. When you angle the vehicle like this further improves it, especially towards the outside. And now we're talking about 320 towards the part where you hopefully are poking your gun over. Cupolas wise, this vehicle also does quite well. Look how small that cupola is on top of the tank. Sure, it's going to be a weak point, but you're going to have to be a really tall target to be able to see it. I think this will function a bit like the weak point on top of a Jagdpanzer 100. And more often than not, you're going to just have to try and find a shot through the lower plate, because the sheer height of this tank is going to stop you from being able to engage that weak point. One thing that is interesting about the 113G is the side armor. It's all 80 millimeters thick, but you see how it's angled? It's kind of slanted down the side here. And unfortunately, what this means is that if you over angle the side of the vehicle, then people do not need very much penetration to shoot the whole of this plate here. And so you've got to make sure you keep it probably about like this to be able to get a ricochet. And if you over angle, it's going to be a bit like engaging the unnerfed Type 5 Heavy, and the cheeks will be a weak point. Nevertheless, all in all, the 113G looks to be really resilient, especially if it does end up meeting lower tiered vehicles. And even with premium rounds, they're not going to be getting through the superstructure of this vehicle, and you will have them at your mercy. Furthermore, the vehicle has got a good old slug of hit points, 2,100. That's more than the E3 and way more than the Object 268. And finally, the vehicle's view range is a decent 390, and if you have a skilled crew and use coated optics, you are going to be able to see your opponents at maximum ranges. And I do think because of the gun handling on this tank that you probably can forego using a gun laying drive and either invest in the camo net or more likely the coated optics or binoculars, depending on how skilled your crew is. But you know what? I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Let's see how the 113G handles itself in action. So here we go, rolling out on Winterberg in a tier 10 only matchup, and there was a little bit of warping there. I am playing on a test server after all, a bit of lag at the start of the game while it catches up. Now, tier 10 only, always a little bit disappointing when you're trying to test out your well-armored vehicles, because of course the lower tiers have got less penetration, and I just want to imagine what a tier 8 tank is going to do to the front of this. I guess it'll be a bit like an E3. The only difference is look how much more mobile this vehicle is than an E3, and so I think it'll just make it so much more fearsome. The E3's armor, well, it's absolutely incredible against tier 10 opponents. Even tier 10 opponents firing premium rounds can sometimes fail to be able to dominate even the lower plate of the T110E3, and God forbid trying to go through the superstructure on that vehicle. But this tank, its upper plate is still great, 300 millimeters of effective all across the upper superstructure of the tank. And look how wide the gun arc is on this tank. It's just absolutely awesome. How much, look at it, to the left, to the right. I was still amazed. I think this is one of the first games I played in the tank. And I'm just trying to check out how far I can stick my gun round the corner here and still keep my armor well angled. And this is just a great advantage. If you do have a wide gun arc, you make the outside of your upper plate so much more effective. And it can be a real great advantage for you to be able to use on the battlefield. But as I was saying, I just think that this tank is going to be so much more effective against vehicles that, shall we say, don't have 260, don't have those 330 millimeter heat rounds. I think it's going to do exceptionally well in those kind of battles because it has the mobility to avoid getting flanked. And that's really where the T110E3 struggles when it's being raided by multiple vehicles. Now, I'm not saying that the side armor on this tank is going to get you out of trouble even against tier 8 opponents. You've got 80 millimeters of side armor. It's not really going to work all that well. But it's your mobility, your wide gun arc, the fact that you can zip it out of trouble and reverse really quickly, twice as quickly as the E3 can, that should avoid them from being able to get your side in the first place. And that's what I'm really excited about with the 113. So our first round goes into the turret of that FV4005. Wow, I'd really love to have shot a high explosive round at the turret of that FV4005 with only, I think it's like 14 millimeters of armor. Would have easily gone in. So we penetrate an AP round to the side of that IS-7. He bounces a premium round off me, so that round had 300 millimeters of penetration and more. And now I'm going to be loading a heat round to just butter my way through the front of this tank. Yeah, 390, what is it, 395? Yeah, 395 millimeters of penetration. He's not feeling too well. But once again, he bounces a premium round off me. So another 300 millimeters of penetration completely absorbed by the armor of this vehicle. So I'm feeling quite confident. I want to push out around the corner. I'd quite like to have a high explosive round loaded for that IS-7, but in the end, it's a good thing that I don't have it loaded. And now we've got a TVP. Now let's see what kind of ammunition that TVP is going to be firing. Well, it's a test service, so I don't think it's even that much of a mystery. There we go, heat from above. He puts one into me, and that's something to take into account of this vehicle. But we bounced the Leopard's armor-piercing round there. Now, when your opponents are above you, the armor on this tank is not nearly as effective, of course, as if you do have them on a level playing field or even hopefully aiming up at you. Now, the Leopard's obviously had enough of firing APCR, and so he decides to fire heat. And this is where I make a little bit of a mistake. I actually allow the Leopard to sneak around back, but I do manage to get myself backwards rather quickly into cover, turn my tank around, and I have the traverse on the gun to just be able to get the shot in. It does feel quite nice in close quarters combat. It doesn't really take you very long to whip up 4,000 damage in a tier 10 tank destroyer, right guys? Especially one like this, 2,647 DPM. Now 2,647 DPM base, it's certainly not incredible. It's not out of this world amazing like on a Stritzfang 103B. But it still does add up, especially when you're doing 824 damage. I think I've been high rolling all of my shots this replay. Been quite a lucky bunny. Can we ram the IS-7? Oh, no, not quite. Will I manage to catch the E50M? Oh, no, not quite. But still, a decent result on Winterberg. So now we're playing on fjords, and we've managed to keep up pace with an IS-7 and a WZ-113G, although those vehicles definitely are faster than me. I'm not trying to say that this tank is nearly as quick as them, but it's time to just be the assault tank that I think that this vehicle can be. Right through the lower plate there of the IS-7, and where does he manage to penetrate me? Well, that's a bit weird. He actually goes through my mantlet. Maybe he just got an exceptionally high penetrating roll, so to say, with his plus minus 25% with his APCR. And he manages to put another round into me, I guess through my lower plate, just before I managed to take him down. Now, I also get penned by the Gorilla, and a high explosive round from a Conqueror gun carriage hits me. But we've managed to take out pretty much the entirety of that tier 10 heavy tank. Let's see what else we managed to do here. Now this is where I'm obviously going to have to not depend on my armor because it's let me down massively this game. And it shows you that unless you are, like, just look at that lower plate. The lower plate is awful. That's something that I really wanted to highlight here. Will we kill the Centurion Action 10? Well, I actually just made a really big mistake, and I realized what I was doing. I thought the Centurion Action 10 was aligning up the other way, and so I shot his tracks. I thought he was aligning up this way, so a big misplay there by me to avoid getting the shot on him. But nevertheless, our team manages to finish him off. And in this kind of situation, it's just a case of having to go get stuck in and try and support the team, and that is sneaking up behind another IS-7. I have a quick look behind me to see what the FV215B183 is planning, and now I push my way into this IS-7, and I think he quickly decides I'm not getting through the frontal 300 millimeters of armor that he has there effective, and so he just gives it up, and we put another one right into the back of his tank. And when you're firing 3.5 rounds a minute, a very healthy rate of fire, you do manage to just seem to pick up damage in this vehicle ridiculously quickly. So the IS-7 pushes around the corner, finishes off the first FV215B183, and that's because there's another one that we're going to have to conquer if we want to take this game down. T57 Heavy. I thought I TK'd the IS-7 there for a second, but luckily it does go through and shuts down the tier 10 American auto-loading heavy tank. Now it's just a case of moving forwards, backwards, trying to avoid the shell. But remember, to all intents and purposes, he's firing Hesh, and he's going to be able to take me out, but I hot-shot him. And you just see how lovely this gun arc is. The fact that I'm able to hide my tank around the dead FV215B, and then be able to just sneak my gun around the vehicle and also still keep the engagement effective. I really can't slam home how lovely the gun traverse, the elevation, the depression on this vehicle were, and how that's a tank that it's not a tank, sorry, it's a statistic that a lot of people would overlook when you're looking at a vehicle. You'd go, okay, it doesn't really have the best DPM, nah, it doesn't have the best accuracy, mobility not the best, armor, well, the E3 is better, but this tank is just so much more flexible than the E3. But it does have its limitations. the IS-7 shuts us down here at the end of the game. And the reason why it was so easy for him is not just because he was only firing premium rounds, but also because the 113G just doesn't do very well when its opponents are above it. Because the vehicle has a sloped superstructure, if an opponent is sitting right in front of it like this, you've got about 300mm of effective upper hull armor. But of course, remember, this mid plate here is quite weak, and the lower plate, well, that's easy to go through. The issue is when your opponents are slightly above you, a lot like this IS-7 was, now your armor is just not very effective at all. And that's certainly something you should take into account if you want to be effective in this tank, and also if you want to be effective at destroying it. So in our first round on Runeberg, we pick up just shy of 5,000 damage, pretty much 50% more than anyone else on our team was able to achieve. 2,250 damage blocked. That is significant. That's more than the hit points of the vehicle. And we did that when everybody is just spamming premium rounds, apart from, I guess, that Leopard 1. And because we barely fired any heat ammunition this game, we still make 23,000 credits profit. Next up on Fjords, this was a defeat. 4,000 damage dealt, more than anyone else. This time, however, our armor didn't work at all, and that's something you must take into account if you're planning on grinding your way towards this vehicle, that the armor is very hit and miss depending on the situation that you put yourself in. But as I don't believe we fired any heat ammunition, we still make a little bit of profit. So the 113G, do I think it's an absolutely fantastic, crazy new, best-in-class tank destroyer in a lot of situations? Well, no, but it's still certainly going to have a role on the battlefield. It's going to be more of a bruiser. It's going to trade well. It's going to have the flexibility on the gun to be able to engage effectively, and the mobility to avoid being embarrassed so frequently, especially by vehicles that you wouldn't think could do it to you like you could in an E3 or a Jagdpanzer 100. And I do think when update 920 is released, we are going to see the 113G tearing it up on the battlefield, especially when it's top tier against some tier 8 and tier 9 opponents. Either way, hopefully you enjoyed this video and it was useful for you. If it was, please consider giving it a like. I'd really appreciate it. And let me know in the comments down below what you think about the 113G. Do you think it looks like a big disappointment? Were you hoping for something a bit more novel? Do you think it looks underpowered, balanced, overpowered? And are you planning to pick one up as soon as they're released? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.